We're in the library module of Lightroom 5 and this is the image I've selected to work on. Now to see it larger, try pressing the spacebar. That's going to open the picture up. This is what drew my attention to this particular image. No, I'm not going soft in my old age, but I just love the way the lighting was coming down through the roof and striking this area of graffiti. A little bit about the details of the actual image. If we come across to the metadata tab, now coming over from the drop down menu, select Exif, and there it is. There's the title. It's a .dng, which is a raw file. Coming through, there's the file dimensions, there's the times, the dates, etc. The exposure, there it is there, along with the f-stop. It was taken at f8, 18mm. It's an 18-55 zoom lens, and I took it at the 18mm, the wide end of the lens. Dropping through, there's the important part here. I underexposed this particular one by 1 stop. What I tend to do in environments such as this is bracket my exposure. So I've got one taken at +1, I've got one at the normal EV value, and this one at 1 stop underexposed. That means I can then select if I want to work on the shadow details, if I work on the highlight details, etc. Or perhaps even combine all three and get a rather nice HDR picture. Right, coming back in, let's take a look through the image again. As I said, it's this area here. So what we're going to be doing in this video is darkening down the image, enhancing the lighting that comes through and striking this area of graffiti. We're going to be adding beams of light. We're going to be darkening down the highlights. So we're going to be bringing back the detail in the sky and the detail around this area here, also the highlights. So to make a start, we just need to come up, click on the develop or press D on the keyboard, which will take us through into the develop module. The first thing we're going to take a look at is the warnings on the histogram. Now bring your cursor over this triangle. You'll notice this is now showing us the shadow clipping. This is where there is no detail in the areas of blue. It is solid black. There is no pixel detail. And what we're going to do is we're going to click down. You'll notice that has now put a white box around this area. We're going to leave it switched on. We're going to come over to the highlights. Now the highlights are those little red spots that we can see in the top right corner. Clicking down, we're going to leave this switched on for the highlight warning. We're going to find this really useful as we start to work our way through. Dropping down to the exposure slider, I want to make this even darker, so we're going to grab hold of the exposure slider. We're going to move it to the right hand side. I'm going to take it down to that area there. That looks pretty good. You'll notice the way the histogram has gone across as well. Coming down to the highlights. Now with the highlights, I'm going to move this into this area. You can see more of the reds coming through. So we now know we need to back it up in the opposite direction. As we take it through into the minus, the little warning triangle has now gone out and we can start to see detail of the sky coming through. I'm going to take it into that area there. We've even got ourselves a nice little white fluffy cloud. Right, coming down to the shadows, moving this to the right hand side. As we move it across to the right hand side, you can see the histogram now coming over. It's now moving across more to the center part, and we're going to bring it to that area there. Looks pretty good. We got +69. Looking at the histogram again, you can see a little bit of a gap around this area. Bring your cursor in, it's saying whites. We're on the white slider. We can move this across to the right hand side. As we move it over, if you go too far, you can now see some little red spots coming back. That warning triangle's gone from black to blue. If I take it too far, it's going to go to white, and you can see even more of those red spots beginning to appear. So we now know we need to back this up a little bit. We've now gone to blue, we've gone to black. I can still see some little red spots, so I'm going to move that down even further into that area there. Looks pretty good. The blacks, as we move this over, going to take it into that area there. Those little warning triangles, or those little warning spots should I say, have now gone out, and the triangle has turned from to black. That's what I was aiming to say. Finally got there. Right, looking pretty good so far. White balance. Now the camera has done a very good job with this, but I think we can do better by picking up the little eyedropper tool. As we bring it across, it's telling us to pick a target neutral. So what does neutral target mean? Well, as we bring our cursor up into an area like this, the bottom where it's given us the R, the G, the B, we need to keep the R figure, the G figure, the B figure as close as possible together. Now I don't think I'm going to get this any closer, and if you take a look right in the center you'll see a little cross. That is the actual color we've selected. Clicking down, and that's done quite a good job. It's actually brought through a little bit more of the color, so I like what that's done to the image. Right, in the next section we're going to take a look at actually correcting the picture, because as we look at it you can see the way this door frame is leaning in, and there's some other corrections we need to make as well. Before we head down to the lens correction, there's one thing I'd like to point out. Now you may notice these downward facing arrows are dotted. That shows us that we are using the solo mode. What is that? Well, if I right click, there it is there. You'll notice a tick against solo mode. What does it do? Well, when I drop down and I click on lens correction, the basic panel's open, but clicking on lens correction, that folds the basic panel up and just opens the lens correction panel. So whatever panel you click on, it'll then close the panel below. It just saves you having to scroll through all those open panels to reach the one that you want to get to. I just find it a much easier way of working. Right, with lens correction, let's start off with basic. We're just going to tick the box for enable profile correction. Dropping down, let's take a look at auto. Now auto is going to evaluate the verticals, the horizontals, and it's going to make its adjustment of it, and it doesn't do a bad job. Levels is going to look for the level, the horizontal levels. No, I don't like what that's done with the door frame. And if we come back to vertical, yeah, that's done a good job, so I'm going to leave this on the vertical. Coming across to the profile, now this is the lens profile. We need to select the make of the lens we are using, so click in here, we got a drop down menu and it's showing all the makes of the various lenses. This is the one that I'm using, so I'm going to go for Fujifilm, and at this stage it'll identify the model of the lens you are using as well. Now in my particular case, me being awkward, it's got it wrong. That's only because there's only a choice of two. I guarantee if you click on yours there'll be a huge list there and it would have identified the correct lens. Now just taking a look at this, I've got the X100 or the X100S. The difference between the two is the vignette around there. Now you can adjust the vignette yourself, dropping down to the vignetting slider. As we move this across, you'll notice the way we can just drop that down. We can also change the distortion, but I will come back to that. Right, let's take a look at color. Now color is removing chromatic aberration. If we come up to this area here, and you'll notice there's those green lines, that is the chromatic aberration. Clicking on remove, and it's now gone. That's done a really good job there. The greens have disappeared. I'm going to just click down, drag my way across to this area because there are purple chromatic aberrations living in this part of our roof space. Dropping down to our defringe amount, come into purple, and I'm going to move this slider across. As we move it across into this area here, you'll notice that purple fringing has now disappeared. Clicking down, we can zoom out. Let's take a look at the manual tab. What you can do, distortion. Now this is for the barrel distortion for pin cushioning. As soon as you bring your cursor over any of the sliders, you'll notice that grid pattern emerges. I'm going to click down on distortion. As I move this down into that area there, you can see the way we can actually remove all that barrel distortion. Moving it up the other way, the pillars become even more bloated. Double clicking is going to take us back to 0, and I'm just going to come across, bringing my cursor over to this area here. I find this easier than actually using the sliders. It's just a little bit more there accurate, and it's not quite as jittery as you get sometimes when using the sliders. Just taking a look, I think we also need to rotate the image very slightly, so I'm just going to rotate this around into, let's just take a look at that area there. Looks pretty good. Our door frame is leaning a little bit, so now I'm going to come up to the verticals and I'm just going to move that into the opposite direction, that direction there, and we need to swing it round a little bit into this direction, and you can see there it is. Just using those guidelines, falling down, you can see the way it's coming down that area. I'm going to come back to the verticals, and we're just going to make a slight adjustment to this by just bringing it in. There, that looks pretty good. So that's the story so far. You can also come down to scale. Now scale is going to take up, because you'll notice these white areas here, it's not going to be a huge amount with this, or you can click on constrain crop. Clicking on constrain crop now fills in that area automatically, and as you can see, that's done a pretty good job. If I just switch this on and off, that's what we started off with, and this now using the basic, the chromatic aberration, and the color, should I say, the lens profile and the manual tab. Yep, we've corrected the image and that's looking really good. Okay, for the next part we're going to take a look at the image itself. The one thing I'm a little bit worried about with this particular image, as I've said, it's the beam of light and lighting up this part, or illuminating this part of our graffiti. But I think the doorway, and in particular this building here, is going to have a little bit too much of an impact on our image. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to be using the Radial filter, so clicking on the Radial filter, down drops the panel, bringing our cursor out. As I click down, dragging it out, as I move it downwards it becomes elliptical shape, moving it out to the right, it's now becoming more oval into that area there, make it a little bit bigger as well. Clicking on the center grab handle, the pin there should I say, moving it into position, dropping down to the bottom, just twisting it round, pulling that side in like this and making it a little bit longer just so it fits. That should do nicely. Right, coming across to the exposure slider. As we move the exposure slider across, look at the way we can brighten it up. So bringing back that highlight on our graffiti area, that looks pretty good. Going to drop down to highlights. Now with the highlights, just move it back and forth and see what sort of impact that has on the image. I'm going to increase that very slightly, because what I want to maintain is that sort of dappled look that we've got on the tiles. You'll also notice that the feather here is set to 33. We can increase it to 0, and you can see the way it now goes to the edge of the selection we've made. If I double click, the default is 50, but 33 there, the number is pretty good, so I'm going to head back for that direction, and there, well, we've got 34. Yeah, that's fine. Coming through, so we've done the highlights. Let's take a look at the clarity. Moving the clarity across into that area, that looks really good like that. Saturation, taking that up, fair bit of saturation. Job done so far. If we just switch it on and off, you can see the impact that's now having on the image. Clicking on close, that's now removed the distraction of having that selection around there. This is what I mean. If you can imagine the beam of light coming through, what's going to happen, we're going to come to this area here, and then our eye is going to wander out because it's going to be caught by the brighter building on the outside of our image. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up, we're going to pick up the crop tool. Now the important thing with the crop tool is just make sure that your padlock is unlocked. So this is going to remove any constraints you may have on it. In other words, with a constraint you can have it 4x6 as we got here, 5x7, whatever the constraint is, and I'm going to click on it. You'll also notice the way that we've got that grey area. This is where, when we were under the lens correction and we used the manual and then we then went for that crop, that's what it's showing us. So I'm going to move this into that area. That looks pretty good. Now don't forget, this is all totally non-destructive. I had thought as well about bringing it up around about that area, but I actually quite like it in this position, which is now giving us almost a square shape to our image. Double clicking will apply, and there it is. Let's just remove that side panel. Clicking down, job done. There's our image so far. To add the beams of light coming through, we're going to come back to the Radial filter, clicking on this, bringing our cursor out. There it is, that little cross. We're going to click down, drag it out into an elliptical shape. Something like that there would be pretty good. Right, now what we need to do is match up the way our beam of light is going to come through with the pitch of the roof itself. To give us a little bit of a helping hand with this, we've actually got the lighting coming through so we can see the angle that's working at. We're going to drag it down by clicking on the center of our pin. Going to place it, that area there on the lighting, coming to the end, going to swing it round. And what I'm going to look for is an imaginary line that I'm going to now draw across from this grab handle, coming through this area here, through the center of the pin and out of that area. And that's going to look pretty good for the pitch of our roof. So I'm now going to lift that up into this area, Great stuff. Right, coming across to exposure, we're going to click on exposure. As we start to move this over, you'll notice the feather is set to 33. Going to take it up into that area there. Looking pretty good so far. In fact, I'm going to come and look at the feather and just perhaps drop it back and forward. No, I'm going to leave that where it was at 33. That was doing a really good job there. Okay, for the next stage, we're going to come over the center pin. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select duplicate. You can see the way that now increases our beam of light. I'm going to come to the outside grab handles, going to move them both in, so we're going to refine this beam of light down even further. Clicking on the pin, just going to lift it out so it comes alongside it. This will now allow us to edit both of these. That area there looks pretty good, but you can see the reds, you can see the warning triangle has come back on, and if we come down to the highlights, we can now move this across. As we start to move it over, you'll notice the areas of reds have now disappeared. That looks pretty good like that. We can take the intensity just by moving the exposure up a touch or two. That looks good as it is. Coming to the outer edge, let's take the exposure up a touch with this as well. And the other thing you might like to try is come to the temperature slider. Now you can cool things down, that doesn't look particularly good, but you can actually warm things up as well. Double click, let's take it back to 0, and I'm going to move this over very slightly just to give a little bit more warmth to the lighting coming in. There, looks pretty good. Just dropping it back a touch more there, just a very slight tint of the warmth in that beam, and you can see the way that's working. That's looking good like that. Clicking close removes all the distractions, and there is a nice subtle beam of light. For the next stage, I'm going to drop down. I'm going to click on effects. Now this is the post crop vignette. Yes, we have actually cropped this image, don't forget. Dropping down to the amount slider. Now clicking on the amount slider, if I move this across to the left hand side, you'll notice the way it darkens down the image, and that does a pretty good job like that. But I'd like to have a little bit more control over the type of vignette that we're actually applying to the image. To do that, we can just simply move the feather slider. We're going to take it over to the 0. You can now see there's the edge of our vignette. If we come to the midpoint, we can move it in, and so that's the midpoint. Coming to the roundness, if I take it up this way, you can see the way we can make it extremely round. Bringing it out the other way, we go to oval, and we get that type of TV screen that they used to have in the olden days that somebody told me about. And you can see the shape of it there looking pretty good. Coming back to the feather slider, now when we move the feather into this area, it's good, and just dropping the amount down a touch or two. That's the type of effect that I'd like to have with this vignette, and as we just click on and off, you can see the difference that makes to the image. So that is just about it. Let's take a look around the picture. I think I'd like to just darken it down a little bit more. So we're going to come back to the basic tab, going to drop down to the exposure, clicking on this, moving it across very slightly into that area there. That looks pretty good. We've gone down to minus 0.9. Looking at the rest of the picture, really like the way it's looking. However, this part of the image here is just a little bit too bright. We've got the beams of lighting coming down, and I think the beams have just brightened up the underside of that ceiling just a little bit too much. So I'm going to come up, we're going to click on the adjustment brush. Dropping down, as you bring your cursor over the brush size there, you can see there it is. It's showing it's a 5 or 5.0 size brush. You can make it bigger or smaller by just clicking on the slider. I am going to drop it back to where we had it before, which was about 5. That looks pretty good judging by the amount of space I've got to work on. The feather, that's set to 40. Auto masking is switched on. Both the flow and the density are at 100. I'm going to bring my cursor up. I'm actually going to drop this down as well. I'm going to take the exposure down to an arbitrary figure of whatever that is. Clicking down, doesn't matter because it's only arbitrary. Bringing it out across like this, and you can see that's way too dark. Just bring it over the other side as well, and just filling that in. Great stuff. Right, pulling the slider back, and as we pull the slider back, what I'm looking to do is to blend in something like this. The amount of lighting that I've got on the column here, this is going to be just a touch brighter, and if we just take a look, and you can see the way that's just dimmed it down, I think that works much better. Right, clicking on close. Something else I like to do, hue, saturation, luminance, clicking on this HSL, and if we go to the luminance tab, we're going to pick up the adjustment. I'm going to come out to the sky, and I'm just going to make the sky a little bit darker. My favorite trick is to use the luminance, clicking down, dropping it down, so going into the minus. You'll notice blues dropping down into -9. If I just drop it right the way down, you can see the difference that's making. Pulling it back up into that area there, that looks pretty good. Something else I'd like to do is just come to saturation, clicking on saturation, come into this area of green. Just find that a little bit distracting, so I'm going to click on it, dropping that down into this area. That looks pretty good like that. Great stuff. Right, coming back to the basic tab, finally down to clarity, bringing clarity up just a touch or two into this area. You can see the difference that's making. And finally to vibrance, playing with the vibrance, coming through. That's it. One final thing I've just noticed, I'm just going to click on this, I'm going to come back. Now everything about this is completely adjustable, and I would recommend you put it aside, then look at it with fresh eyes. I've got a feeling this is just a little bit too bright, so I'm going to drop it down. Because we've darkened down the image, you also then have to look at the lighting again and reassess the lighting, and I'm just going to drop it down into that area there. That's better. Right, clicking on close. Job just about done. Okay, let's come and click on YY, and there it is. That's what we started off with, minus the crop. And if we just take a look, there is our finished image. If I press L on the keyboard, that's going to dim down the background so you can see the images more clearly. Pressing L one more time, we're now on a black background. So go on, give it a try. Until the next time, it's happy imaging, and take care.